I'm Mike Knopfwood, a 28-year-old businessman. I work for a pretty big and famous company in my hometown. I'm part of the sales team, and there's a business drinking party almost every night. The clients seem to really like the place I chose for the gathering, so I think it was successful. I felt a sigh of relief. My boss is whispering something to our CEO. It looks like he's planning for the next place. Probably, they're going to a fancy place with attractive ladies, along with our client CEO. I guess us regular employees are calling it quits here. We hailed taxis for the higher-ups to send them off. Our tipsy CEOs seemed to be in high spirits. We made sure nothing was left behind with seniors, and then us regular employees dispersed. My colleagues were heading off to a bar, but I'm not much of a drinker. Despite the invite, I declined and decided to head home early. I wanted to enjoy my only hobby, gaming, when I got home. As I was excitedly heading home, I heard a dispute in a side alley off the main street. Normally, I ignore it, but I stopped in my tracks when I heard a young woman's voice. Squinting into the dark alley, I could see a girl about college-aged and a man about my age arguing about something. The man seemed to be forcing the girl, and she was clearly uncomfortable. "Hey, stop that!" She tried to keep her voice down, but it was clear that she was rejecting him. The man was holding her arm, seemingly trying to forcefully take her somewhere. The girl appeared to be about the same age as my younger sister. "Hey, maybe you shouldn't be forcing her like that," I called out quietly towards the back of the alley. The man turned around and glared at me. From just one glance, I could tell he was wearing a well-tailored suit. His tie is designer-made. His leather shoes are nicely polished. He seems like a rich guy. "Back off, you're out of your league, man." Quite a mouth on him for a privileged guy. Maybe he's a rich brat gone bad. I sigh inwardly. I just wanted to go home and play games. Stepping into the alley, the humidity instantly rises above the level of the main street. It's probably damp air from the air conditioners attached to both sides of the buildings. But she seems uncomfortable, and you're acting like a thug, so I can't just ignore this. While saying that, I nonchalantly grabbed his hand, shielding the girl behind me. Talking circles around people is something I'm good at. "Hey, Ginny, do you know this guy?" the man yelled as he tried to violently grab the shoulder of the girl behind me. I shielded her, making sure his hand doesn't reach her. He clicked his tongue and then attacked with pretty heavy punch. I absolutely hate violence. I was blown to the wall of a building, hitting my back hard. I tasted iron in my mouth. The man looked down at me, now slumped against the building wall. There was a vulgar grin on his face. These kind of guys never stop at one punch. He's the type who gets excited by the violence he inflicts. Just as I tried to escape, a kick to my stomach made me groan. See, just as I thought. I nearly laughed at how well I had read him. Just as the man clenched his fist again, the girl thrust her cell phone screen in his face. "If you don't stop, I'm calling police. Are you planning to make your dad clean up the mess again?" She said this with a voice so cold, it was like she was mocking him. Maybe because he didn't believe she'd actually call the police, his fist clenched tighter. Without hesitation, she started using her cell phone. From the speakerphone, you could hear the voice of a police officer answering a 911 call. He kept asking, "What's the matter?" The man lowered the fist he'd raised and clicked his tongue. "Don't run, Ginny." The man said this and ran off down the alley. She ended the call only after making sure he had gone. "We should move before the police arrive. You don't want any more trouble, right?" She grabbed my arm to help me up, and then lent me her shoulder as I wobbled. Her side profile is a real beauty, but with a hint of darkness, a pure yet mysterious beauty. By the time we reach a bench in a park away from the alley, we're both sweating. She made me sit on the bench and bought a couple of bottles of water from a vending machine. She gave me one and used the other to dampen her handkerchief and gently wiped my face. I rinsed my mouth with the water she gave me, but I could still taste iron. It looked like I had cut the inside of my mouth quite a bit. "We need to get you to a hospital. You're bleeding." She said this with a worried look while holding the cold handkerchief to my wounds. "I'm fine. It's not as painful as it looks. Are you hurt anywhere?" At my words, she opened her eyes wide in surprise. Then, tilting her head slightly, she looked at me in puzzle. Did I say something strange? Just as I was about to open my mouth again, her slender hand moved swiftly. Before I knew it, my suit jacket was whisked away. Excuse me. Suddenly being stripped of my jacket, I was flustered. "I'll get it cleaned and return it. I'm sorry, but could you please provide your contact details?" She said this in a polite but firm tone. She quickly tossed over items that were in the pocket. When she found a business card holder in an inner pocket, she smiled. "I'll take a business card, if you don't mind." "Excuse me." She promptly pulled out a card, and she tossed it over to me. She took the business card and paused for a moment. "I'll be in touch. A call from a college girl must be a nightmare. Give me your number." It seemed like I had run into a charming thief. As I told her my number, she repeated it without taking a note. She then introduced herself as Jenny Garcia. Just as I was about to say that the cleaning wasn't necessary, my phone started ringing. The caller ID prominently displayed my boss's name. The message was urgent. The CEO of a client company was drunk, and I was needed for help. "Sorry, I got some work to do." I left her in the park as I rushed off. It was regrettable, but I had no choice. She watched me silently from within the park until I hailed a taxi and got in. A week later, I received a call from the charming thief during my lunch break. She must have timed it to catch me on my break. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a hunch it might be her. "The cleaning is done. So when can we meet?" I told her I would be free after work tomorrow. "I'll send you the meeting place via text." And she hung up the call. The meeting place she texted was a restaurant I was not familiar with. Her message said, "As a token of my appreciation, let's have a meal." It's a restaurant picked by a college student, so it probably won't be anything too fancy. I prepared a bit of extra cash in my wallet and headed to the designated restaurant the next day. And now, I'm scared. The restaurant was not for students, and I was led to a private room hidden behind a concealed door. Frozen in place, I was sitting rigidly when she arrived a little late. "I'm sorry for making you wait," she apologized, bowing her head. I barely managed to respond with a weak, "It's fine." She sat down on the pulled-out chair in an accustomed manner and ordered the chef's recommended course. Dishes that I've never tasted before appeared, delighting both my eyes and palate. Like magic, drinks were refilled at just the right timing, and the friendly waiter helped to ease my tension. The final dessert was served in front of me, and cheese was placed before her. Being a lover of sweet things, it was the best cake I've ever had in my life. You're not having the cake. I don't like sweets," she admitted, her face darkening a bit. "I used to be fine with it," she added with a smile. "Tastes change as we grow, and not every girl in the world loves cake." I simply responded, "Is that so?" and shrugged it off at the time. During the meal, we had all sorts of conversations. The guy who had bothered her turned out to be her fiancé. She talked about marrying right after graduating from college, but she didn't seem happy about it. I could easily tell something was going on. "Aren't you too young to be getting married already?" I blurted out. Jenny merely smiled awkwardly in response to my question, not saying a word. She seemed resigned, and her smile could also be interpreted as a knowing smirk. In just 2.5 hours, I found myself wanting to know more about her. When I reached for my card to tackle the bill I was dreading, I was told it had already been paid. "It's on me as you helped me," she said with a smile, handing me my freshly cleaned jacket. As we left the restaurant, she quickly said goodbye and began to leave. "Wait, I have a proposal," I blurted out, desperately wanting to keep her from leaving. Upon being called, Jenny slowly turned around. The sight of her looking straight at me was breathtakingly beautiful. "If you get married soon, let's do the things you won't be able to do once you're married." She looked surprised at my words, her eyes widening. It was a bold proposal, but it was all I could think of. Jenny was set to marry that guy right after graduation. And clearly, it wasn't a marriage she wanted. So I thought, why not enjoy her freedom until she gets married? I wanted to see her smiling, preferably by my side. "What a proposal," she said, her voice filled with a hint of disbelief. Suddenly, I felt embarrassed. When I timidly asked, "So, is it a no-go?" Jenny shook her head. "Where are you taking me for our fun day out?" she asked with excitement. I was relieved to see her anticipation. "Well, let's start planning then," I said, and she nodded in agreement. And just like that, she smoothly linked her arm with mine. Thus began our little game of playing lovers. From that day, Jenny and I went on many dates in various places. There was no rule as to who should ask, but it was always me inviting, and her accepting. There were a lot of things I learned from our numerous dates. She was more of a sheltered lady than I had imagined. She was too excited with the aquarium and being childish as she wanted to touch penguins. At the zoo, she fussed about wanting to take home a baby lion. During a horse riding, Jenny, an experienced rider, left me behind and ran into the forest. I remember feeling awkward when she showed up in a summer dress for the county fair. I was forced to buy a cotton candy that was 3 times the size of her face. But she remembered that she hated sweet things, which made me burst into laughter. Her persona was completely different from when we first met, and I was constantly surprised. That day, we went to an exhibition by a female woodcarver who specializes in animal carvings. She enjoyed sitting on a life-sized orangutan carving and playing with the kids. I found the scene somewhat heartwarming and watched while leaning against the wall. "Oh, teacher, hello." Suddenly, I turned toward the voice. There was a familiar-faced boy, grinning at me. "Hey, are you here with your family?" I noticed a girl holding his hand. He nodded with a hearty smile. "You're a teacher?" Out of nowhere, Jenny, who had returned, asked with curiosity. "Oh, are you the teacher's girlfriend?" "He's a boxing teacher." The boy responded clearly to Jenny's question. "In fact, I'm good at boxing, and I teach grade school kids at the gym run by an old college." Jenny stared at me in surprise, learning this new side of me she wasn't aware of. It was quite embarrassing being stared at so intently. Jenny watched the boy energetically say goodbye and run back to his parents. "You could have hit back, but you didn't," she murmured to herself. I knew she was talking about the time when we first met. "Why didn't you hit back?" she suddenly asked seriously, and I looked at Jenny. Her face was very serious. "I just don't like hitting people." It may have sounded contradictory, but that was how I truly felt. I knew the pain of hitting someone and being hit, That's why I didn't like hitting people. I think this hesitation was the reason I was always the runner-up. During my school days, I was a runner-up in every competition. I could never fully commit to winning. Every time I came in second place, I felt sorry for my family, who was cheering for me. Would you say the same thing, even when you absolutely need to hit back? She asked in a cold voice, reminding me of when we first met. I felt an unbridgeable chasm between Jenny and me, as if we were standing on opposite cliffs overlooking a deep valley. I couldn't answer her question. Ever since our date at the exhibition, I had lost contact with Jenny, and a week had passed. There was no response to my calls or emails. She used to pick up on the first ring. I was worried that something might have happened. Perhaps I had been written off because I couldn't answer her question at the time. I was anxious to see her again. Just as I was about to try to contact her again, a colleague called out to me. He delivered a message that the director wanted me in his office. I hadn't made any mistakes at work. I put on the jacket I had taken off and knocked on the door to the boss's office. The boss said in a low voice, "Come in." In the boss's office there were the boss and the director and the CEO of a client company. And one more person, the man who had been bothering Jenny, was sitting back on the sofa. "I'm disappointed in you, trying to steal my nephew's fiancée." So, the man who was bothering Jenny was the boss's nephew. The client company's CEO also looked stern. As I stood there dumbfounded, the boss explained. Jenny was the daughter of a client company's CEO and the boss's nephew's fiancée. He emphasized that their marriage was necessary to strengthen the partnership. It seemed like they were insisting on a marriage to expand their companies. I was taken aback, wondering what they were talking about. So, in short, the CEO's nephew desperately wants her and he got the company involved, right? The truth just slipped out of my mouth. I felt the temperature in the CEO's office rose dramatically. The CEO of our client company was a person of not so great reputation. I heard that originally the current CEO's brother was the CEO, but he was kicked out and the current CEO took his seat. He had mistresses here and there and ran the company recklessly, or so the rumors went. "That's enough. I want you to quit the company. We can't afford to keep a thief cat in the company." I was disgusted by the CEO's ridiculous comment. Next to that CEO, the CEO of the client company was nodding deeply. He said he couldn't do business with a company where thief cats were present. Personal life and work are separate matters. Annoyed at the nephew grinning at me, I said to the boss, "I don't want to give up on myself as I have been working hard till now. I thought this is the time to become desperate. I thought I'm fed up with giving up on Jenny and my job. I'm not interested in your opinion. This is my company, and I don't need you." The CEO pointed to the exit door and told me to leave. At that moment, the door he pointed at was opened without a knock. "What the hell? We're having an important conversation," the CEO immediately yelled at the person who opened the door. However, the next moment, everyone in the CEO's office was stunned and couldn't move. "It's been a while, Uncle. My father sends his regards," Jenny said to the CEO without a smile. The boss's nephew, her fiancé, was stunned. "Was it you, Uncle, who was secretly sniffing around me, or was it my fiancé?" It wasn't until Jenny told me that I realized. The CEOs found out about Jenny and my relationship because someone was sniffing around us. Probably someone in this room hired a detective and investigated. And I was caught out. "You're also to blame. Meeting secretly with Mike. It's irresponsible behavior while being engaged." Jenny snorted at the CEO's words. It was clear that she was looking down on everyone except me. The CEO of the client company warned Jenny, "Don't meddle." Jenny looked at me and smiled a little. "I'll handle this." When Jenny declared that to me, she threw a bundle of documents at the client company's CEO. "You're fired, CEO Williams," Jenny said to CEO Williams with cold, icy eyes. CEO Williams, flustered, flipped through the documents thrown at him. With each page he turned, his face turned paler. "My brother is the CEO from today." Incredible. Jenny conspired with her real brother and took over their father's company, investing in her father's company from her company, and gradually buying up shares behind. "We'll take back my father's company." Jenny glanced at her fiancé, who was totally in shock, and thrusted documents at him too. The words compensation were written. Jenny informed her fiancé that she would claim damages for all the mental distress he has caused. Then her gaze shifted to our company CEO. He flinched slightly. "I will poach Mike for company, and brace yourself, I will bring down this place too," Jenny said, her mouth the only part of her that's smiling. Her eyes were not. "Is this your idea of revenge?" Hearing CEO Williams' squeezing voice, a big smile appeared on Jenny's face. "If you compare it with what you've done to my family, it's nothing. The real hell starts now." In truth, Jenny isn't CEO Williams' daughter but his niece. Her biological father was the CEO who was ousted by Williams. Jenny's father, having lost control of the company, died from a combination of stress and overwork. Seemingly, her mother, who had been part of a loving couple, died of illness not long after. Only Jenny and her brother were left. Jenny was taken in by CEO Williams, and her brother was put into a facility. It's likely he adopted Jenny because he thought she could be a useful pawn in the future. He probably never imagined that she would turn on him. Jenny had been patiently waiting for a moment of revenge. As CEO Williams collapsed in defeat, Jenny looked at him once, then extended a hand to me. "Welcome to our company, Mike." Just as she had declared, Jenny set out to destroy the company where I had been working. The employees trembled at the sight of her relentless advance, with no hesitation or doubt. I started working as a secretary to the CEO at Jenny's company. The CEO is Jenny's real brother, James. He's the same age as me. The new job was tough in many ways, but somehow I managed. The company seemed to be changing into a more pleasant workplace, freed from dictatorship. I think the brighter expressions of the employees are proof of that. I would love to say everything is going well, but there's one thing that worries me. Jenny has been avoiding me. Ever since the incident in the CEO's office, she has been actively ignoring me. Even when we pass in the hallway, she just acts as if I don't exist. Just when I was trying to find a way to talk to her, CEO James showed up. "Do you know what a Savannah cat is, Mike?" Confused by the unrelated topic, I tilted my head. A Savannah cat is a breed of cat born from the crossbreeding of a serval cat and a domestic cat. It's about the size of a dog. Depending on the breed, it is necessary to register with the local government to keep one. That large, mountain lion-like cat, right, they are rare in the US, I replied. James then asked me to somehow arrange for a Savannah kitten. As the CEO's secretary, it's not unusual to be relied upon for personal matters as well as work. James, being the same age as me, often makes unusual requests. I thought it would cheer Jenny up. She hasn't been her usual self lately, he said with a look of concern. Indeed, if I showed Jenny, who demanded to keep a baby lion, a Savannah cat, she'd be ecstatic. Sure thing, James is pretty indulgent towards Jenny. Sure, I'll look into it right away. And prepare a cake that she would like, It's her birthday soon. When I heard cake, I was surprised. Jenny is supposed to dislike sweets. James should know that. Jenny doesn't like sweets and can't eat them, right, but a cake. At my words, James seemed taken aback and sat down on the spot, scratching his head. I was taken aback by his sudden strange behavior. Holding his head, James muttered, "That girl, what a fool." Apparently, when Jenny was little, she loved cakes. When her family got together for her birthdays, she would beg her father for various types of cakes. Even when the company was taken over, her father would still buy her a cake. Then, the day after Jenny's birthday, her father collapsed and never came back. Jenny believes it's all her fault. James told me that she thinks if she endures her favorite, her father will come to see her. James never expected that even now, as a college student, she would still hold on to that wish. Take back the company, crush the trading company that drove her father to ruin. Jenny, who coldly gets everything done, is still a young girl who just wants to see her father. When I think about how much she's sacrificed to regain happiness, I feel like tears will overflow. I promised James about the Savannah cat and pleaded with him to tell me where Jenny was. I just wanted to talk to her. I drove to the place James told me. The exhibition we went to together is on its final day, and Jenny is said to be there. In the exhibition room filled with the excited voices of children, I found Jenny, lost in thought. She was staring at a family looking at a wooden bear, seemingly enjoying themselves. Her profile looked expressionless, yet it also seemed like she could burst into tears any moment. Found her. I gently whispered and gripped her hand so she couldn't run away. Jenny, who looked back in surprise, had noticeably lost weight since I last saw her. "Why are you avoiding me?" She shuddered at my question. I stopped her from trying to run away by tightly gripping her hand. With a resigned look, she relaxed and said in a small voice, "Because you hate hitting, don't you?" Jenny continued in a small voice, thinking I despised her because I hate hitting. Her voice was shaking slightly. "I hate and am bad at hitting, but it depends on the time and place. I've changed my mind a bit." I spoke to Jenny as gently as possible. "If it's for you, I'm sure I can handle it." Upon hearing my words, Jenny started shedding tears. She told me she felt terrible for affecting innocent employees' families by taking over companies. But she always acted tough, to show that the person she resents is herself. She said she was prepared to carry all the blame and live her life. "Is there anything I can do for you?" I gently asked the crying girl. Then, in a small voice, she replied, "Stay by me. Like my dad, don't disappear, always be by my side." I wanted to hold her right away, but I restrained myself. Instead, I put a lot of strength into the hand we were holding. "Certainly, I'll always be by your side, Jenny. Can you smile at me every day?" At my question, Jenny cried and nodded many times. While watching her tears, I made a promise to myself. I will never make her cry again after today. I'd even import a Savannah cat if it's for her. Surely, she'll hug the big cat and show me a full-faced smile. The more the merrier when it comes to family, right? As I muttered this, looking at families around us, Jenny's face turned beet red. "Isn't it a bit early for that?" "Not at all." I thought on our way home from the art exhibition. "I will buy a ring at a jewelry shop on the way." I was thinking about this, looking at Jenny's blushing face. Who would have thought that our meeting that day would lead to this? I had no idea back then. Now, I'm grateful to God for our encounter that day. My name is Mark Johnson. Along with my wife, Susan, We run a public bathhouse, a business inherited from my grandfather's time. We had a fateful encounter with a child. It was on a day in early spring when the chill still lingered in the air. It was a little past 9 o'clock in the evening. Having seen off the last customer, I was preparing to close the store with my wife. I left the indoor cleaning to Susan and went to take down the entrance sign when I spotted a small figure near the trash dump located a little way off from our shop. Under the glow of the street lamp, I could see a raggedy girl rummaging through the garbage. At that time, I thought the girl was just searching for something. But considering the late hour, I thought I should say something to her. I called Susan, and we approached the girl together. As we got closer, we saw a girl in a thin long-sleeve shirt and skirt, barefoot, in the cold season when a jacket would still be necessary. Although she wore sneakers, they didn't fit properly, and she was stepping on the heels. Surprised by her appearance, both Susan and I could do nothing but gawk, until I finally spoke up. "Little lady, it's quite late. Are you looking for something?" Perhaps startled by being addressed so suddenly, the girl flinched and turned towards us. Her hair, slightly longer than shoulder length, was messy, lacking the luster typically seen in a child's hair. Her bangs were long, obscuring her eyes. "I'm hungry," she replied. Hoping not to frighten the jittery girl, I gently addressed her. "So you're hungry, huh? But it's late. Let's call your house. Do you know your home phone number? We can phone your mom or dad to come pick you up." But the girl shook her head vigorously. "I get it. It's scary to go to a stranger's house, isn't it? How about this? We'll call your folks while we wait together here." Since it was late, I thought she might be suspicious of us. However, the girl confessed. "My mom hasn't come home for about 3 days. I've been waiting for her to return, but I'm so hungry." Her words led me to suspect possible neglect or abuse. "So, how about we call the police and you wait here a bit?" I asked. "No, not the police. Mom said no to the police," she exclaimed. The mention of the police seemed to put her on guard all at once. Just when I was contemplating calling the police despite her reluctance, we heard her stomach growl. Susan was the one to break the silence. "Are you hungry? When did you last eat?" "I haven't eaten since this morning. That's why I was searching for some food," she replied. Susan and I were lost for words. A girl in thin clothes, rummaging through garbage at night, having not eaten all day, was a heartbreaking sight. "Would you like to come to our house?" Susan proposed. I was surprised by her words. Taking a child home without contacting the police might lead to complications later. Perhaps sensing my concerns, Susan looked at me and said, "I understand your reservations. As adults, it may seem right to call the police, but how can we leave a child out here, shivering from the cold and hunger?" I resolved myself when I heard my wife's words. "If the girl is resistant, we can go to the police tomorrow. The most important thing right now is to provide this shivering child with a warm place and a meal to fend off her hunger." I put on a smile and reached out my hand to the little girl. "Come home with us, it's okay." The girl seemed hesitant for a while. But after some time, she took my hand. My wife held the girl's other hand. And so, the three of us hand in hand, returned to the public bathhouse. It seems the girl's name is Alice, or so she says. Upon returning to the bathhouse, my wife and little Alice went to bathe together. In the meantime, I went to prepare some clothes. Alice's clothes looked cold and dirty. They were no longer wearable. I brought some of my wife's clothes. A coat, shoes, and pants with a string. With the string, if tied tightly, she should be able to wear the pants without them slipping off. I quickly ran to the convenience store and bought some small-sized women's underwear. I also picked up a toothbrush while I was there. By the time everything was ready, my wife and Alice had come out of the bath. The underwear and clothes seemed a bit large, but she managed to put them on. The girl who came out of the bath had color back in her pale face and looked more like a child. Her hair, now washed and dried, was softer than before. But her long bangs were unmanageable, so my wife held them back with a pin. Underneath her long bangs was a cute face that had been hidden. "Are you feeling warm now?" When I asked, Alice nodded several times. She seemed excited. "You know, the bath is huge. It's like a swimming pool, and it's so warm. I've never taken a bath like this before." I felt relieved seeing her smile as she spoke. I was worried because she was expressionless, not like a child at all, when we met her at the garbage dump. While I was drying Alice's hair, my wife was preparing a meal. Our house is right next to the public bathhouse. After Alice and I finished drying our hair, we moved to our house next door. There, my wife served the meal she had prepared. It was a warm pot of soup. The girl's eyes sparkled at the sight of the soup, filled with vegetables, meatballs, and noodles. "Can I eat this?" My wife smiled at Alice's question and said, "Feel free to have as much as you want." After that, she ate a lot. My wife gave her a fork and a spoon because she was spilling some food as she struggled with chopsticks. She may have never been taught how to use chopsticks. "It's delicious. I haven't had a warm meal in a long time," said Alice. Thinking about the environment she must have been in up to now, my heart felt like it was about to burst. Once her stomach was full, Alice seemed to trust us a little and started talking about herself. Her mother hardly ever comes home, so she looks for food in the garbage dump. She's 7 years old, in the first grade of elementary school. But she doesn't have clean clothes, shoes, or a school bag. She's teased and bullied by her friends for smelling, so she doesn't go to school. The story we heard from the girl was shocking for us. "Are you going to call the police? I like it here. I want to stay here." Neither my wife nor I had any doubts. Seeing the hardship little Alice had been going through, I hope she could at least have a warm, restful sleep tonight. "Don't worry, you'll sleep with us tonight. We have a comfy bed for you, but will you go with us to the police station tomorrow? The officers are kind, so you'll be okay, and your mom might be worried too." Alice stayed silent for a while, then replied, "I understand. I hope Mom's worried about me," before drifting off to sleep. I wanted to tell her that her mom was probably worried too, but I couldn't. It's not easy to speak well of a mother who is likely neglecting her child. If I were to say something to comfort her on the spot here, she might end up getting hurt later. We spread out 3 beds in the carpeted room. When she got into bed, Alice seemed quite happy. "This is amazing. I've never been in such a soft, warm bed. I hope Mom isn't cold. I wish she could sleep in a warm bed too." The sight of her worrying about her mother, who left her without even giving her food, made my wife secretly cry. It was tough for me to keep from letting Alice see my teary eyes. The next day, we escorted Alice to the local police station. I can't forget her slightly lonely expression when we were parting. "Are you guys saying bye-bye now?" I held back tears and put on a smile. "I hope we can meet again someday. The police will take good care of you, so there's nothing for you to worry about, okay?" I told her, and Alice nodded. My wife hugged Alice for the last time. As we left the station, Alice waved at us with a smile. We had become so close to Alice overnight, and it was heartbreaking to say goodbye. On the way home from the police station, my wife was very worried about what would happen to Alice. We don't have any children, but we always loved children, and we used to say we wanted about 3. When we couldn't have any and went to the hospital, we found out that my wife has ovulatory dysfunction. Yet, there are ways to have children in modern times. We underwent fertility treatment with medication. Despite taking breaks occasionally, we went through 10 years of fertility treatment. But we couldn't have a child. At the 10-year mark, we decided to stop the fertility treatment. We didn't want to give up. But we were exhausted from the ups and downs of whether or not we could have a child. We decided to cherish our time as a couple, knowing that we've tried our best. We've been living quietly as a couple since then. That's why we couldn't stand parents who let their precious children feel cold and hungry. Later, we couldn't help but worry, so we contacted the police station where we had taken Alice. It turns out her mother had not been found after leaving home. It seemed Alice was going to a foster care facility. We were given the name of the facility since we were the ones who had found her. My wife and I immediately went to visit Alice. Many children were living away from their parents at the facility for various reasons. When we went to see her, Alice hugged my wife. They told me that Mom might not come back. "You guys aren't going to stay with me, are you?" At her words, my wife and I were frozen, only able to deflect, unable to answer Alice's straightforward question. We were not relatives and couldn't live with Alice. But when we spoke with a staff member at the facility before leaving, we heard about foster parenting and adoption. When I felt this was it, I looked at my wife and she was looking at me seriously and nodded. It was the moment when we, as a couple, made a decision. We decided to learn about foster parenting and adoption that day and signed the necessary paperwork. In Alice's case, since she had just arrived at the facility, we needed permission from the family court to start the process for foster parenting or adoption. But the permission came without issue at a later date. Since then, we attended training and workshops to become foster parents, leading busy lives. During that time, we occasionally visited Alice. We had once asked her, "How would you feel if we wanted to live with you, to become your family in place of your mom?" Alice replied with a radiant smile, "I'd be really happy." That alone motivated my wife and me to keep going. Normally, a mother carries her child in her womb, nurturing them with care while the father supports to ensure the child is safely born. But we didn't have that process. We couldn't undergo the kind of struggles that typical parents have. That's why we combined our strength as a couple to overcome the busy days, holding the goal of making Alice smile more, to become her parents. But then, one day, an incident occurred. We received a sudden call from the facility staff. "Isn't Alice with you?" We were informed that Alice had run away from the facility. My wife and I hurried to search for her. Our house and Alice's old apartment are far from the facility. Just when we were fearing the worst, imagining that she might have been involved in an incident, we received a call that Alice had been found near the facility. She was apparently taken into police custody. We immediately went to see Alice, who had returned to the facility. Alice's face was wet with tears. "I wanted to go to Uncle and Auntie's place, to eat meals and take baths in the big tub again," she confessed. My wife and I, unable to say anything, hugged her small body tightly. After this incident, our desire to become a family with Alice grew even stronger. After things had settled down, I asked Alice to promise not to leave the facility on her own anymore because it was worrying. And then, I once again talked to the facility staff about wanting to take Alice into our care. After over half a year, the procedures were finally completed. My wife and I legally adopted Alice. 4 years later, my wife, Alice, and I were living happily. Alice was no longer suffering or feeling cold. She was attending school cheerfully every day, wearing a beautiful school backpack. However, a little before Alice's birthday, we received a letter from her biological mother. It was a request to meet her on her birthday. Without hesitation, Alice replied that she would like to meet her mom. To be honest, the speed of her decision made my wife and I anxious. But Alice is now in the 6th grade. She's at an age where she can make decisions for herself. We respected Alice's decision. We agreed that if Alice expresses a desire to live with her biological mother after this meeting, we would consider it positively. On the day of the reunion, Alice headed to the designated cafe by herself. My wife and I anxiously waited for Alice to return, and she did after about 3 hours, seemingly acting as usual. According to Alice, her biological mother had remarried. Her mom was smiling more happily than Alice had ever seen before. Alice was relieved to see her mom so happy because she had loved her mom even when she was left behind. So I told her, "I'm glad for you, Mom. I truly meant it when I said, 'Congratulations,'" Alice said, showing us a smile. Forgiving someone who abandoned you is no easy task. I was reminded yet again of what a sweet, proud daughter we have. And looking slowly from one parent to another, Alice firmly declared, "Mom, Dad, thank you for finding me. Meeting my real mom made everything clear. I felt relieved after seeing her and immediately wanted to return to you both. This is where I belong." Seeing Alice so confident made us feel relieved that we'll be together from now on. After that, we decided to go buy a cake for Alice's birthday as a family. When I suggested holding hands, Alice, looking a little embarrassed, agreed, saying, "Just for today." I remember we held hands with Alice on the way to the bathhouse on the day when she was rummaging through the trash. But Alice's hand has grown so much since then. Alice will continue to grow. We don't know how long she'll want to hold hands with our parents. But no matter how big Alice gets, even if she no longer wants to hold our hands, she'll always be our precious daughter. We'll cherish this happy moment and continue to walk together as a family of 3. So, how was our story? Your subscription to our channel provides us with great motivation to continue sharing our journey. Until the next video, take care. When she saw my big, she exclaimed, "It's amazing," and became ecstatic. As I presented it to her, she opened her mouth wide and eagerly took it in, biting down. Seeing her delighted expression filled me with happiness too. When I asked for her impression, she spoke with tears welling up in her eyes, saying, "I feel so incredibly happy. I think it was the most beautiful smile in the world." But there were many things that happened before she showed me that smile. Let me tell you the story this time. My name is Sean Taylor, 30 years old. I work as a pastry chef at my family's cake shop. Recently, one of the staff members quit, so we were short-handed. On this day, I was exhausted from working overtime. Since I work at my family's shop, I decided to live alone so that I could relax and do things at my own pace after returning home. My apartment is about a 15-minute walk from the family cake shop. While descending the stairs of the pedestrian bridge on my way home that day, I slipped and missed a step. It was probably because I was completely exhausted and feeling dizzy. At first, I felt pain when I collided with something, but I don't remember much after that. It was fortunate that I didn't bump into anyone. When I regained consciousness, I was already being transported to the hospital. "Mr. Taylor, can you hear me?" A nurse said, the line often heard in medical dramas. With a vague consciousness, I turned my gaze towards the voice, and the nurse was just about to touch my clothes. The beautiful nurse who was about to strip me naked had a tightly fitting white uniform that was bursting at the seams. Most men might be particularly weak to well-endowed women, and I was no exception. I found her incredibly attractive. Yes, the nurse standing in front of me was my exact type. I felt like I had seen her face somewhere before, but my consciousness was hazy, and I couldn't recall. Anyway, even though I didn't know the extent of my own injury, I considered myself lucky just to have encountered a beautiful nurse, and I lost consciousness again. And when I woke up next, the treatment was already over, and I was fully conscious. When I was being transported and feeling dazed, I didn't realize it, but I actually knew the beautiful nurse I thought was lucky to meet. "Wilson, Margaret Wilson, right?" I muttered as I saw the nurse who came for a checkup. She smiled and fluttered her name tag on her chest. "That's right. It's been a while. When you were brought in, you didn't react at all, so I thought you had forgotten me." "No, I was just in a daze back then. There's no way I could forget." Yes, there was no way I could forget. She was my first love. She and I were classmates in elementary school. She was bright, kind, cute, and even excelled in academics. She was popular in our class. I, on the other hand, was clumsy and couldn't study or excel in sports. She was always there, subtly helping me, the one who was constantly teased by others. She was my first love. Back then, she was taller than me, and I had this childish idea that I would confess my feelings to her when I became taller than her someday. But that day never came. She transferred to another school when we were in 5th grade. I think she mentioned it was because of her father's job transfer, but it was truly sudden. Of course, I couldn't confess anything, and all I managed to say was, "See you later." To meet my first love again in a situation like this, it was unimaginable. And not only that, I was glad that she remembered me too. While I was hospitalized, she made time to visit my room. She even brought snacks outside of her working hours. I looked forward to talking to her every day. It was the highlight of my day. But sadly, the day of discharge came quickly. I didn't want our parting to be just a simple "see you later" like it was in elementary school, so I gathered my courage and asked for her contact information. "Can I have your contact?" I was so nervous that I thought she could hear my heart pounding, but she readily agreed. "Of course, that's fine. I've lost touch with all our classmates from back then, so I'm happy that you reached out to me." With her gentle smile, I realized it clearly. I had fallen in love with her all over again. She probably just thought of me as a former classmate she reunited with. From here on, I wanted to somehow appeal to her and elevate myself to a potential romantic partner. That's what I had in mind. After my discharge, we exchanged messages and had various conversations. In addition to that, we started going out to eat together. She remembered a lot about my time in elementary school. Although she only seemed to remember embarrassing and clumsy anecdotes like when I cried because I couldn't eat mushrooms, or when I got hit in the face with a basketball pass, or when I fell with my school bag into a ditch and ended up covered in mud. Despite that, she would laugh and say, "You were cute back then." So, I felt like it was okay to be clumsy. And during one of our meals together, I confessed my feelings to her. After I asked her out, Margaret fell silent. Then, in a small voice, she said, "I'm sorry. It was disappointing, even though I had tried my luck with the confession." But since she seemed apologetic and had a somber expression, I made an effort to maintain a cheerful expression. "No, don't worry about it. I just wanted to express my feelings. I don't think I can be a match for someone like you, Margaret." When I said that, Margaret seemed flustered and denied it. "No, it's not like that. It's not that I dislike you or anything." It seemed like she had something else she wanted to say. "Is there another reason? If you don't want to say it, that's fine. But if you want to let it out, I'm here to listen." After hearing my words, Margaret seemed to have made up her mind. She let out a small sigh and then began to speak. I was married once. I'm divorced. I got married right after college. He was really kind, and I loved him so much, but he cheated on me. On one of the nights I had a night shift and there was a sudden change in my schedule. I came home and found a woman I didn't know there, and it wasn't the first time. It seemed like he had been bringing women over whenever I had a night shift. Her voice was trembling, and I could tell she was shaken. I wanted to hold her hand, but our relationship didn't allow for that, and it frustrated me. I had no idea until then. After that, it became difficult for me to trust in a relationship, so I'm sorry. She bravely shared her painful memories and accepted my feelings with sincerity. All I had was gratitude towards her. Upon learning about my feelings, she said it might be better if we didn't contact each other anymore. I was the one desperately trying to hold on to her. I expressed that I wanted to meet again, even if it was just as friends. I wanted to bring a smile to my first love who had been hurt. I rejected your confession. Are you okay with meeting me?" Upon hearing those words, I vigorously shook my head side to side like a fool. "No way, of course not." My desperation finally brought a smile to her face. From then on, Margaret and I continued to meet as friends, just the two of us. The change came about half a year later. It all started with the accident I was involved in. A drunk driver crashed into the pedestrian crossing. In an instant, I reached to protect the child walking beside me. I felt like I was hit by the car and was thrown a short distance. And when I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital room. I woke up 2 days after the accident had occurred. This time, I was in a different hospital from where Margaret worked, and she wasn't there. Instead, my parents were with me. When I checked my phone, I saw a flurry of messages and missed calls from Margaret. We had plans to meet on the day of the accident. Without any contact and unable to reach me for 2 days, her messages expressed concern about my well-being. I hurriedly called her, but she didn't pick up. She was probably at work. But I didn't want to keep her worrying, so I called the hospital where she worked. And after being able to reach her, she came to my hospital room 2 hours later. My parents had just left. Honestly, since she was working, I thought I wouldn't be able to see her that day, so I was surprised. "Why are you here? What about work?" But she didn't answer my question. Instead, tears began to stream down her face. I panicked and tried to speak to her, but she didn't respond. I even offered her tissues to wipe away her tears, but she didn't take them. She continued crying, not worrying about her face getting soaked with tears. And after she had cried to her heart's content, she started lecturing me endlessly. "Sean, you get injured way too much. How many times do you have to be taken to the hospital to learn your lesson?" It was the first time she scolded me. Well, this time, it was more like helping someone. Help people without getting injured, you idiot. As excited and agitated as she was, sometimes her words didn't make much sense. However, I understood that she genuinely cared about me. During the 2 days when she couldn't reach me, she couldn't sleep, worried at night. So when she received a call from me at her workplace, she immediately left early and rushed to my side. Seeing her eyes being puffy with bags, I couldn't help but feel remorse for causing her concern, even though I was trying to protect a child in the accident. Suddenly disappearing without a word, I didn't feel alive. Let's stop this kind of thing. This will be the last time, okay? She insisted, emphasizing her point, and I promised. Yeah, from now on, I'll be careful. I won't worry you. Upon seeing me again, she muttered, "This is dangerous." Huh. I was taken aback and at a loss for words, and that's when she showed me her first smile of the day. "I can't just leave a clumsy person like you alone. I have to keep an eye on you," she said. "So, you mean, as friends?" I asked cautiously. Margaret smiled and said, "As a boyfriend and a girlfriend." Huh. I stood frozen for about 3 seconds, then shouted, "Yes," and did a victory pose with a loud voice. It caused some pain in my broken rib, and I had to press the nurse call button, but I didn't care because I was so happy. From then on, Margaret and I continued our relationship smoothly, and a year later, we decided to get married. However, for the first time since we started dating, problems arose between Margaret and me. It happened on the day I came home from work, just a few days before our wedding. We had been living together for 2 months, and Margaret would always greet me when I returned from work. But on that day, Margaret wasn't there to welcome me. Feeling funny, I entered the living room, and what I saw surprised me. Margaret was crying. She had both hands covering her face as she silently wept. "Double, what's wrong?" I approached Margaret anxiously, and she moved her hands away from her face. Her eyes were red from crying. "What were you doing? It's so late." I arrived home after 10 p.m. But I had informed her that I would be late due to work. Didn't I tell you? It's because of work." "Really? Lately, it's been happening every day, hasn't it? Is the cake shop that busy at this time of the year? I feel like it's not really work." I didn't understand the meaning behind Margaret's words. There was no reason for me to be late other than work. I didn't have frequent outings with friends or any hobbies. She should have known that. "You're not seeing someone, are you, like another woman?" Margaret said while crying, and tears streamed down her face once again. It was at that moment that I finally realized. Margaret suspected me of cheating. It was true that I had been working overtime frequently for the past month. Was she carrying this anxiety every day? Margaret had experienced a divorce before due to her partner's infidelity. I felt so pathetic, realizing how much I had made Margaret worry during this past month. I tightly held Margaret's hands with my both hands. "I'm sorry, I started working late suddenly, and it made you anxious. Whenever I asked for details about your work, you always deflected the question. I wondered if you couldn't tell me. I believe you wouldn't cheat, but because of my past and the fear of being kept in the dark, I felt anxious." It was true that I had been evasive when Margaret asked about the specifics of my overtime work. I wanted to make Margaret happy, but instead, I ended up hurting her. At this point, there was no other choice but to tell her the truth. "Come with me." I took Margaret to the cake shop owned by my family, where I worked. There were numerous cake illustrations and cake samples in the refrigerator. "Is this a wedding cake?" Margaret murmured as she looked at the illustrations. "Yes, I wanted to make our wedding cake myself. I've been thinking about what kind of cake would be good. I wanted to surprise you and make you happy. That's why I couldn't talk much about my overtime work. But it made you anxious, didn't it?" Margaret let out a deep sigh upon hearing my words. Perhaps she had been on edge all this time. "I'm sorry for doubting you. It's all right. They say it's common to feel anxious before getting married. And considering your past with your ex-husband, I understand how being kept in the dark can make you anxious. I'm sorry for making you worry." After exchanging apologies, Margaret eagerly tasted the cake samples I had made and exclaimed, "It's delicious," with a smile on her face. Looking back, we had been busy with wedding preparations and creating trial wedding cakes for the surprise, leaving little time to spend together. It felt like it had been a while since I last saw Margaret smile like this. Margaret said, "I'm looking forward to the wedding cake," and she didn't seem to have any anxieties. It's unfortunate that it wasn't going to be a surprise, but Margaret's peace of mind is more important. I'll do my best, so look forward to it. I decided at that moment to make the best cake ever. So, on the day of the wedding, she looked incredibly beautiful in her wedding dress, and there was no bias in that statement. Margaret was overjoyed when she saw my large wedding cake. When she said she couldn't eat because it is a waste, I jokingly said, "Please eat it. I made it just for you." During the first bite, where the bride and groom feed each other cake in front of everyone, both Margaret and I had beaming smiles. As I scooped up the cake and offered it to Margaret, she instinctively held my hand, holding the spoon tightly. Then she opened her mouth wide and took a bite of the cake. "I'm so happy. It's the most delicious cake I've ever had. Thank you so much," she said with a smile. She was the most beautiful in the world, and I reaffirmed my determination to make her happy. I used to think that I was prone to accidents and had a streak of misfortune, but thanks to getting injured, I was able to reunite with such a beautiful bride and marry her. Maybe I'm actually lucky. That's what I think now. How is it? By subscribing to the channel, you can support our production. See you again in the next video. My name is Jason Miller. I'm 25, just your average office worker. In my quiet and low-key life, I have an older brother named Kevin, who is the complete opposite of me. Ever since our school days, Kevin was flashy and loved to stand out, always surrounded by friends and followers. If that was all, it would have been fine, but he was often in fights during school, and my mother was constantly called in. No matter how many times he was summoned to school, or how much he made our mom cry, Kevin never seemed to care. For better or worse, he was someone who never allowed himself to be swayed by others, always going his own way. Our mother, who raised us alone, sometimes wondered if she had made a mistake in how she brought him up. But I don't think so. Whether or not our father was present, Kevin would have lived his life freely, just as he does now. That's just who he is. There's nothing to do but give up. Upon graduating high school, Kevin left home. He's been living from paycheck to paycheck, constantly switching between part-time jobs. When we were kids, we played together all the time since we were close in age, more like friends than brothers. But as we grew older, our relationship deteriorated. Or rather, our personalities were too different, and by the time we reached adolescence, we stopped talking to each other. Even though we lived in the same house, it felt like we were strangers. That's why I didn't feel lonely when Kevin left home. I only wished that he wouldn't cause trouble for anyone as a member of our family. But of course, my wish went unanswered. When I started working, I moved out and lived alone, but I often went back home because I was worried about my mother. One day, while visiting home, Kevin suddenly showed up out of the blue. This happened when Kevin was 26. It was his first time home since high school, so it had been about 8 years. Standing next to Kevin was a petite woman with delicate features. With her beautiful face, she bowed deeply to my mother and me, who were frozen at the entrance. "Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Nancy, Kevin's girlfriend." Nancy, who introduced herself with an apologetic look, was next to Kevin, who was uninterestedly looking away. Both my mom and I were surprised. Kevin's girlfriends had come to our house before, but none of them were as polite as Nancy, who greeted us. They used to ignore us, or even smoke confidently in our house. But then, Kevin made a shocking statement. "I got married. This is my wife, she's due in the summer. Take care." Next to my stepmother, I couldn't help but raise my voice. "Married, and she's pregnant." In response to our reactions, Nancy bowed her head again. "I'm really sorry." Seeing Nancy bow her head weakly, both my mom and I managed to calm down. We decided to hear the details from Nancy, who seemed more willing to talk than Kevin. Nancy is 22. She had been working part-time since graduating high school, but she now has an office job. She happened to meet Kevin in a bar, they started dating, and she soon found out she was pregnant. They just got married, and she's currently 5 months pregnant. I had heard from Kevin that he had already spoken to his family about our marriage registration and my pregnancy, said Nancy, her voice wavering. "Until recently, I was bedridden due to severe morning sickness. I had no idea he hadn't spoken. I'm really sorry." Nancy's parents had passed away and she appeared to be estranged from her relatives. From what I had heard, she seemed to be a sensible person, and I couldn't fathom why she was dating Kevin, let alone considering marrying him. But there was a new life growing inside her, so turning her away wasn't an option. Moreover, Kevin seemed incapable of holding down a job for long and was careless with money, leaving him with no savings. Nancy found out only this morning that he was even in debt. When Nancy pointed out their inability to sustain a livelihood, Kevin casually suggested they move in with his parents. My mother and I were dumbstruck. Nancy apologized to us repeatedly, saying she would work and would not cause us any trouble. Kevin, who had put her in debt and impregnated her, did not apologize. However, I couldn't abandon pregnant Nancy, so I accepted her and Kevin into our home. "I apologize for my foolish son. Nancy, you must feel helpless without your parents. You must be worried about your living situation because of Kevin. Please live here. I'm still working, and I want you to take care of yourself and prepare for the birth," my mother said. At her words, Nancy's eyes welled up with tears. I'm sorry. As soon as I give birth and am able to work, I will start working immediately. I promise to repay this kindness," she vowed. "Both things have gone awry. We are family, and that's what matters. Let's help each other out. Kevin, you need to work hard too. No more wasting money. That's the condition of you living here, got it?" Kevin grudgingly accepted the condition. "I get it," he muttered. And so, the three of them, my mother, Kevin, and Nancy, started living together. I had been sending money to my mother and decided to increase the amount. My mother told me I didn't need to do that for Kevin, but I was not doing it for him. I was doing it so that my mother and Nancy could live comfortably. There were many things about Kevin that were irritating and frustrating. But what was vexing was the fact that the ones who had to deal with this were our mother and his pregnant wife, Nancy. I was concerned if Nancy, who had just met Kevin after many years of him not coming home, and his mother could manage to live together, but their cohabitation was surprisingly going well. Kevin seemed to be working, and Nancy was a hard worker and considerate, which made life seem more comfortable for our mother. In fact, when Nancy's belly began to grow and she wanted to slow down, it appeared that our mother was there to support her. However, such a life didn't last long. As Nancy entered her final month of pregnancy and they thought the baby might be born any moment, Kevin disappeared. He went to work as usual but never came back. When they called his workplace, they found out that Kevin had gotten into a fight with a coworker and abruptly declared "I quit" a few days ago, and indeed he never showed up to work after that. They haven't been able to get in touch with him since. We had considered accidents or incidents, but they found Kevin's note on the desk in his bedroom. I can't handle this life after all. Being a father too, not happening, sorry. That was it. With just that, Kevin had abandoned Nancy and the child that was about to be born. Nancy broke down crying. She was so distraught that it made me and my mother worried. She didn't have a family home to return to. Kevin was her only family to rely on. I imagine she was terrified about what life would be like with a child on the way. Nancy talked about leaving the house right away. I can't impose on you with Kevin, John. There's no blood relation between me, my child, and you. I can't be that much of a burden. The one who stopped Nancy from leaving was my mother. She begged her to stay at least until the baby was born. My mother was probably worried about Nancy being alone too. About a month later, Nancy gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Mia. But while Mia was fine, Nancy fell sick after childbirth. She kept bleeding and had a fever that wouldn't go down. There was no way Nancy and Mia could live on their own, so they continued to live together. During that time, they had many discussions and decided that our mother, Nancy, and her baby Mia would continue to live together and raise Mia. I moved closer to their house and supported them as much as I could. I thought there might be times when they would need a man's help. Once, I asked Nancy what she thought of Kevin, who had irresponsibly left without even getting a divorce. I thought she might be holding a deep grudge. But Nancy wasn't harboring any resentment. Kevin was never good at living his life. He was a burden to those around him and only thought about himself. But he reached out to me when I was lonely and chose to be with me. I know he's a hopeless case, but I just can't bring myself to hate him because he gave me a family when I was all alone. I guess I just don't have a good judgment when it comes to men. She said that with a lonely smile, a smile that I think I'll remember for the rest of my life. I would have treated her better, wouldn't have made her suffer, even though I thought that I couldn't express it. Nancy was my brother Kevin's wife after all. 2 years passed, and then one day, my brother Kevin passed away. We learned about it from a call from the police. Apparently, Kevin had been living about an hour away by train. But his life was as aimless as ever. He was jumping from job to job, getting into fights from time to time. He often drank with friends until the early morning hours. And in the end, he died in a drunk driving accident. I'm sorry, Nancy. It's all because of my poor parenting that things ended up like this. Mom, having lost her son, apologized with tears swelling in her eyes. But Nancy gently stroked Mom's shoulder. It's my fault as his wife. I couldn't keep him with our family. Both Mom and Nancy blamed themselves. So, I glared at Kevin's portrait. Neither Mom nor Nancy are at fault. It was Kevin's life. Only Kevin is responsible. Both Mom and Nancy weakly nodded at my words. But when we went to Kevin's apartment to sort out his belongings, we discovered something. Apparently, Kevin, who was known for his reckless spending, had been saving money in his bank account. On the cover of the bank book, in messy handwriting, it said, "Nancy's and the kids' money. Don't use it, me." Whether he was trying to turn over a new leaf or was attempting to atone in his own way, we'll never know now. What's clear is that Kevin was saving money for Nancy and little Mia. When I saw Kevin's handwriting on that bank book, I cried for the first time since his death. My big brother, who was so bad at living, an irredeemable mess. But he was trying to change for his family. Not only me, but Nancy and Mom seemed to feel something from this fact, and we all cried together. He was by no means a good guy, but he was still my only brother. No matter how messed up he is, it seems that saying goodbye to family is always hard. I understood that. After saying goodbye to Kevin, we were met with yet another tragedy. Right after a month after Kevin's death, Mom passed away from a heart attack. There was no warning. It was all of a sudden one day. Nancy and I were completely knocked down by this. But somehow, I kept my footing, supporting Nancy. I was the only one left who could extend a hand to her and little Mia. In the 2 years since Kevin left us, Nancy had become more than my brother's wife to me. She had become the woman I loved, the woman I wanted to protect. Because of this, I had to stay strong. With this thought, I desperately held back my tears. Even after my mother's funeral, there were tons of things to think about, like what to do with the house, how and where Nancy and Mia were going to live. Maybe all of these concerns took a toll on her. Nancy fell sick. I explained the situation to my workplace and managed to get some time off. Someone was needed to take care of Nancy, and someone was also needed to look after Mia. Nancy kept saying, "I'm fine," but I insisted. And so, I ended up living under the same roof with my beautiful sister-in-law, now a widow. Since I had often played with Mia before, I managed to take care of her. Little Mia, who still didn't understand that my mother and Kevin were gone, played energetically that day and fell asleep. Nancy and I fought to go to sleep as well, but there were no guest beds in our parents' house. Mia's bed was for children, and the only adult-sized one was Nancy's. Sleeping in my mother's or Kevin's bed felt wrong. "There's only one bed, huh?" Upon my murmur, Nancy, who was slumped on the couch, answered in a small voice, "I'm fine." "What?" I looked at Nancy's face in surprise. Her tone didn't sound like she was joking, but I didn't think she was serious either. Nancy's expression was gloomy, and I understood from it that she was feeling extremely lonely and vulnerable right now. So, I forced a smile. I wanted Nancy to keep her spirits up. "I'm a big guy, you know. You'd be crushed if we slept together," I said. After a moment's pause, Nancy broke out laughing. "Haha, you're right, sorry. I'll sleep on the couch. You take the bed and get a good night's sleep. Sorry, I know it might be hard to relax with me in the house." As I said this, Nancy patted the spot next to her on the couch. "Don't worry about it. Sit down here for a bit. It's nice to have someone around after so long. Would you like to chat for a bit?" There was no way I could refuse an invitation from the woman I loved, so I sat down next to Nancy. She then let out a sigh. She looked good, so she seemed to be feeling okay for now. "A lot has happened," she said. "After Kevin, my mother also passed away, leaving just Nancy, Mia, and me. I'm sorry, my family, they've brought nothing but sadness to you and Mia," I said. Upon hearing my words, Nancy clenched her hand that was resting on her knee. "Losing your mother was devastating, but about Kevin, it's complicated. Why did he leave us? If he regretted it and was saving money for us, why didn't he come back sooner? I sometimes feel like complaining about him, but then I hate myself for thinking such things about someone who's passed away." Nancy's voice trembled, and I felt a tightening in my chest. And what's with drunk driving? He was really hopeless, but I knew he was that kind of person. I should have stopped him, but I couldn't, and he's gone now. When I think that Mia and I couldn't be the reason for him to turn over a new leaf, I feel so empty. Nancy was blaming herself. I placed my hand on Nancy's. Her hand was shockingly cold. So, I gently held it, trying to warm it up. Nancy didn't shake off my hand. "Nancy, it's okay. Don't blame yourself so much. Kevin was always a selfish man, but even so, he was trying to save money for his family before he passed away. The very fact that he was trying to do something for someone else was an incredible thing, and it was undoubtedly thanks to you and Mia that he could do so. That was my true feelings. But I don't want Nancy to be trapped in thoughts of Kevin forever. I want her to seek her own happiness more. Nancy, am I not good enough? I won't let you or Mia suffer any more sadness. Will you live by my side from now on? Nancy was silent for a long time. Then, looking into my eyes, she slowly opened her mouth. If it weren't for you, if I hadn't had you, Jason, I wouldn't have been able to survive. I think I feel the same as you, but please give me a little more time. I need time to come to terms with the reality that my Mel and Kevin are no longer with us. I understood Nancy's feelings very well. That's why I responded that I would wait, no matter how long it took. A year later, Nancy, Mia, and I together performed a memorial service for Kevin and our mother, then visited their graves. As we stood at the gravesite, I reflected on the past year that Nancy and I had supported each other. It seemed that Nancy had been able to reconcile her feelings over the course of the year. Today, Nancy was showing a smile as if she had let go of everything. And then, with her hands joined at the grave, she said, "Please give me your son, Mil. I promise to make him happy." Mia mimicked her, exclaiming, "Please." So I also clasped my hands. I'll make Nancy and Mia so happy that Kevin will regret what he left behind. Let him regret it from above. At my words, Nancy showed a full-faced smile. Then, the three of us, with Mia in the middle, held hands and went home. I won't let go of these hands, no matter what happens. That much I've decided. I hope you enjoyed this. Subscribing to the channel will be a great encouragement for me to create more content. See you in the next video.